requires a couple of people. They all do, though, don't they? When you think about Wall Street attorneys, you don't necessarily think of traditional Chinese medicine or holistic healing. It's just not the reputation. Eric Remensperger thought he was healthy until he received a diagnosis that changed his life. We'll find out what he knew and how he revamped what he knew. Dr. Barish-Wreden is an integrative functional medicine practitioner and the medical director for the Institute of Health and Healing program in Sacramento, which is a part of the broader integrative medicine program at Sutter Health. We are going to hear what they have to say, a little bit different setup because they're both going to talk to us. Please welcome Eric Remensperger and Dr. Barish-Wreden.
Well, welcome everyone. Great to be here. I know many of you out there. I have the privilege of interviewing Eric. We thought we would do this in a more conversational, informal style, but interviewing him around his diagnosis and his process. And so we'll begin with just Eric telling us a little bit about his story and how he ended up here with us today.
Thank you, Max. I have to start off by saying that I had to go outside after Terry's talk to clear my throat because I was laughing so hard I was crying, literally.
And I was going to say, I'm going to be your inner bitch upstairs.
I have my own. It is a bitch. Yeah, my journey started, I'll go back a tiny bit and just kind of jump into it because I don't want to spend too much time on that. There's a lot of things we can't talk about. But when I was a practicing attorney in New York, I was the furthest thing you could possibly be from healthy. I was work hard. I related to my job as a lot of lawyers who work on Wall Street do. I was a heavy drinker. I was a 2-pack-a-day smoker. I basically lived on cigarettes, cocaine, alcohol, and takeout Chinese food. That was my life. And that all changed in 1992 when the first thing I did was quit smoking cigarettes. I had a doctor who said, Eric, you have an extremely addictive personality. Why don't we come up with something other than cigarettes you can be addicted to? And I said, what would you suggest? And he said, how about exercise? And so I kind of transformed, it took about 2 years for me to do this, but I transformed into your classic gym rat, which is what I became. I went to the gym, and of course I cleaned up my diet, but it was the Men's Health diet, for those of you who don't know what it was like back in that period of time. Men's Health magazine, Men's Fitness magazine had you having a ton of protein, no fat, whole grain carbohydrates, and I ate the same thing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day, and I went to the gym every single day. And for the first time in my life, really, I started getting physically fit. I was never physically fit. I was skinny fat as a kid, and I just was never physically fit. Wasn't athletic or any of that. And so that went on for a few years, and during that period of time, I suffered from a couple of very serious chronic conditions. And I had seen a lot of different allopathic doctors to see if I could treat those conditions. One was a chronic cough, which plagued me for decades. And none of them could even move the needle, even a tiny bit. And some just said, look, you have to learn to live with this. This is just going to be part of life for the rest of your life. And I thought, okay, well, that's it. And then I stumbled across this guy named Stephen Rogers who had kind of this whole holistic program he had created. I was taking his movement portion of that program at the local YMCA. And so he diagnosed me over the phone and really got my chronic conditions all addressed in one shot. And I was so enamored by this concept that there's more to healing than just taking a pill. There's more to like health than the physical aspects, because he's focusing on the energetic, emotional aspects. And that kind of opened my eyes to the fact there's a lot more going on to life than what meets the eye, right? And so I decided, he said, well, we were looking at some space together, because I was, as an attorney, I was helping him kind of figure out where he was going to build this holistic center. He turned to me and he said, Eric, do you want to invest in the center? And I said, Stephen, I'd be thrilled to. And so I did. So I became the investor partner, and he was the brains behind it, in this holistic center in 1997. And that got me started down this rabbit hole. And I took my obsessive compulsive disorders, which I have many, and I really applied them to wellness in the broadest sense of the word. Of course, a lot of it I learned through the experience of traditional Chinese medicine, but it wasn't just that. It was trying all sorts of, experimenting with all sorts of dietary regimens, including vegan, raw vegan, primal, this raw primal diet where you eat nothing but raw meat, raw eggs, raw dairy, raw honey, raw cheese. And that diet was promoted by a guy named Agenas Vanaplanets. I was experimenting, I was in that kind of phase. And I moved into kind of a Paleolithic diet, and that was my mainstay for a long time until I decided to dabble in ketosis. And during this entire process, I just wanted to get more actively involved in wellness. And I was meditating, although I was more, to be honest with you, I was dabbling in meditation. I really wasn't meditating. I was kind of forcing myself to sit quietly for 10 minutes every day, and I'd probably do it once or twice, maybe 3 times a week if I was lucky. But I was doing a lot more movement stuff. I was moving out of just going to the gym and doing yoga, and doing a lot of kind of breath work and grounding, and drinking clean water and eating nothing but wild salmon and grass-fed meat. I was living the cleanest possible life you could imagine from my past. And that all changed rather dramatically in 2016, only a little over 2 years ago. When I was at a conference, I used to go to all these conferences, the Bulletproof Conference, Paleo Conference, Metabolic Therapeutics Conference. I was like, good, I want to learn this stuff. And while I was at that conference, they had this electrostimulation device on the exhibition hall floor. And I wanted to show off to my friends. And I had them put it on my lower abs and turn it on full blast. And it hurt, and it hurt really bad. And I was doing everything I could not to cry and scream. But my friends were watching me, so I had to tell them, I'm a tough guy, I can handle this. And it was actually the next day when I started having difficulty urinating. And I had spasms in my bladder. And I thought, oh, it just must be that. I tweaked my bladder with that device, and I was stupid, it'll clear up. And so I flew back to Los Angeles, and about a week went by, and it didn't clear up. And so I had seen a doctor for the first time in 10 years. I moved to Santa Monica in 2007. And I hadn't seen a doctor since moving to Santa Monica. My doctor was down in Manhattan Beach where I used to live. So I found a local doctor and I went to see him, and he wasn't very good. But he did digital exam and did some blood tests on me. Of course, it took 3 weeks to get the blood test back. When the blood test came back, it said your PSA level was very high. It was 21.1. He said, I think you should go see a urologist. So I booked an appointment with a friend of mine who's a urologist, and he ran me through the whole battery of tests that you want to go through to see if you have something serious. I thought it was BPH, for those of you who know prostate cancer, benign prostate hyperplasia is just a swollen prostate. It's not cancerous. And I was convinced the entire time that's all I had because I was way too healthy to have cancer. And I was actually, and I don't watch television very often, but I was trying to get my mind off of this. And then a few things we can talk about that I did very early on in that process to get into a healing phase, but I was just convinced, okay, I'm gonna wait for the biopsy, I'm gonna wait for the biopsy, I'm gonna wait for the biopsy, because all the other tests came back saying, hey, you got some real serious issues here. So the biopsy came in, and it was tested positive in all 12 sites for prostate cancer. Gleason score 9, which is as aggressive as it gets, and prostate cancer typically is not that aggressive. And it was outside the prostate. It was in my lymph nodes, and it was in some of the bones, all in the groin area, in the pelvic region. And I remember sitting at home with my girlfriend at the time, Diana, as we were watching television when the phone rang at about 8 o'clock at night, and my doctor called me to tell me this. And he's a friend, so he, but he didn't mince words at all. He just, as soon as I answered the phone, he's like, hey, you got some serious problems. This test results are back. You have a very aggressive form of cancer. You need to go see an oncologist as quickly as you can. And I recall the experience that I had at that point in time was very similar to the experience you might have, although it's times 10. If you have low blood sugar, you stand up and everything kind of blacks out, you feel your world kind of crumbling in on you. That's kind of the first experience I had, where I just felt this kind of numbness, this like everything was just completely standing still. And of course I cried, and rightfully so, I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. And then I kind of stepped back a little bit, and I looked at kind of my life that led up to that point in time. And I said, here you are, you're not living your passion is wellness. You're not kind of following your bliss in a lot of aspects of your life in addition to that. Why don't you take this and see if you can really get your arms around it, see if you can do something with this for yourself, right? Not even for anybody else, just for me. And so I decided I was going to do a really, really, really deep dive into cancer and the causes of cancer.
Speak a little bit about what it was like for you, just emotionally, when you have this sudden, unexpected bad news, and then how long did it take you before you were able to start to put your arms around it and look at it as
Okay.
Perhaps a teaching moment.
The first thing that popped into my head was, why was I putting so much time and effort for so long in being healthy when I could have just been eating McDonald's, smoking cigarettes, geez, doing all this stuff, and look at me, right? I look physically perfect, and I got this serious health condition. And so that was kind of the first emotional reaction was, what am I doing? I am doing all this stuff. Am I nuts? Right? Does this stuff even work? What's the point? Anybody who tells you to clean up your diet and get all the toxins out of your life and this is going to keep you from getting cancer, I'm living proof that's not the case. But I'd say it was really probably, it seemed like an eternity, but it was probably about 4 days when I kind of and it was probably after, there's this interlude between when you're asleep and when you're awake, when you have all sorts of things coming at you, which we might label inspirations. That's what I like to think of them as. And you have to write them down, because if you don't, by the time you get out of bed and go turn on your phone or whatever it is you do in the morning, they're gone. But it's in that period of time when I try to just be still and sit with this. And that's when it kind of dawned on me that this is something that, look, Eric, if you're going to survive this, you're going to have to do some real serious work, not only to address your condition, but to figure out what to do to address your condition. Because I'm not a doctor, all right? I know wellness, but I don't know medicine. I don't practice medicine, right? But I do know a couple of things as an attorney. I know evidence, that's one. And evidence-based medicine, boy, don't get me started on that, okay? 2, I know context, because that's what we're trained to look at. We're trained to look at things in context. That helps with the evidence to see kind of where the incentives are. And the 3rd is kind of alignment of interests. So you can see where somebody's talking to me, you can see, wait a second, are they really telling me the truth, or are they selling something? Because it's easy for someone whose livelihood depends on something to say things from the heart, even when it's not necessarily 100% true. It's just the nature of human beings. And so, okay, I just decided I'm going to go crazy, and I read everything I get my hands on. I'm a voracious reader as it is. And when I say voracious, I'm a little bit, I'm a skeptic by nature, and I'm also very opinionated and hard-headed. And so if I look at something and I don't like it, and I don't think it resonates, I immediately throw it away and find something else that does resonate. But I went and went and went, and I looked and I looked and I looked. And I discovered there were 2 books in particular that I thought were particularly useful in getting your bird's eye view of cancer, and the history of cancer, and the development of the the medical response to cancer as a condition. And that's The Emperor of All Maladies, which is a very hefty read, but that talks specifically about allopathic treatment of cancer, right? And then there's Travis Christopherson's book, Tripping Over the Truth, which is, he's a medical journalist, so it was a fun read, it was an interesting read. And he's not an alternative proponent, but he is very much a guy who's like me, very cynical about kind of so-called evidence-based medicine, and he's definitely in that space as far as more on the allopathic side. But I found those 2 books to be particularly useful.
And he also talks about the work of Dr. Otto Warburg.
Yes, and Thomas C.
Dr.
Fried.
Winters talked about earlier, and Dr. Thomas A. Fried,
Right.
molecular cancer cell biologist who's...
Right, and just so those of you who don't, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, I don't want to lose the audience, but there are really 2 schools of thought. There's a lot of different ideas, right? But there are 2 main veins, if you will, or theories on the causes of the disease, right? There's Otto Warburg, who won the Nobel Prize in 1938, coming up with the metabolic theory of cancer. And then there was once they discovered the DNA, they kind of jumped on that. They originally, those of you around, I was around then, those of you who were around then know that at that time, medicine said everything's caused by the DNA. If your DNA has these sequences, you're going to get this disease, right? They didn't know yet about the impact of epigenetics, which they discovered much more recently in the last 15 years or so. And the power of your lifestyle and your choices and your emotional state, your inner landscape, and turning on and turning off. I'm using that term loosely, but genetic expression really is based on that. And so first thing I thought is, okay, I need to figure out which camp I fall into. And so I looked at all the evidence on both sides, and it was very clear to me that Warburg was right. This is a metabolic disease, and part of my bias comes from traditional Chinese medicine, which we're going to talk about in a second. But when you really kind of analyze the nexus of the disease, it really kind of starts very, very early on at the mitochondrial level, and the ability of the cells to respirate and produce energy. And you can have all sorts of factors that can come into play that can upset that process. And that's why cancer seems to be caused by a lot of different things, but it all focuses on that energy production. And I think the most compelling piece of evidence, this was actually in, I think it was in Tom Seyfried's book, I read all of them, Travis Christopherson's book, is, and Seyfried mentions the same study. There were 2 different studies done at 2 different universities where they took mice, and I don't know if you know this, but mice all die of cancer, right? Elephants rarely die of cancer. We humans fall somewhere in between. We're about 50%, okay? But mice are particularly useful for cancer studies because they typically all die of cancer. But they took 2 groups of mice. They took 2 groups of mice. One of them, they took the genome, which is the portion of the cell where the DNA resides, but they took the genome of a cancer cell, and they removed the genome of a healthy cell, and they swapped the genomes. And then they took the cytoplasm, which is where the genome resides, and they injected it into mice. Now, if cancer were caused by a DNA sequencing, then you would assume these mice would all end up with cancer, because they took a cancer's DNA and they plugged it right into the mouse. And there were 2 different studies done. There were a total of 78 mice. I think 1 or 2 actually got cancer. Keep in mind, all mice got cancer, but during that window of time they were testing, 2 got cancer. And then they ran the test in reverse, okay? They took the genome of a healthy cell, and they put it...
So when he's saying genome, it's the DNA,
Right.
the genetic code that we
Right.
think about as the cause of cancer that we traditionally have thought of.
That's where it would be. That's where the genes are. That's where they reside. And they put it in the cytoplasm, okay, of a...
The liquid of
Right, with the cell where the genome resides and the mitochondria live, okay? And so they took the genome of a healthy cell, put it in the cytoplasm of a cancer cell, put it in mice. All the mice got cancer. Okay? If that isn't good evidence that this is more of a mitochondrial dysfunction than a DNA problem with the DNA sequencing, I don't know what is.
And the mitochondria are the engines of the cells.
Right.
So we usually say now when the mitochondria are healthy, the cell tends to be healthy, the body tends to be healthy, and mitochondrial disease is being looked at now for multiple degenerative diseases that we are dealing with.
Correct.
In the Western world right now.
Correct. And mitochondria, see, Otto Warburg...
How am I doing? Am I...
You're spot on, Doc. Otto Warburg didn't know about the mitochondria because it hadn't yet been discovered. It came later. Pete Peterson discovered the mitochondria, did a lot of study using Warburg's theory. But the mitochondria is where the cells respirate. That's the energy production. That's the process by which we live. That's what gives us, that's what makes us warm-blooded creatures. That's our life force, is residing in these little kind of cells, these little organelles called mitochondria in our cells. And so so cancer cells, and so okay, that was my first, okay, fine, I know now I'm squarely in the Otto Warburg, this is a mitochondrial dysfunction. It doesn't mean, for those of you who have had doctors who are very, very smart, I mean, the doctors who study the DNA stuff are brilliant, right? It doesn't mean that they're wrong, that there's no DNA sequencing mismatch or dysfunction in the DNA. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the dysfunction occurs at a very early stage that can't even measure it, because we can't measure ATP production. Right? We don't have a system. You go to the blood work and say, how's my ATP production going these days, doc? Like a blood test. They don't do that, right? So what I'm saying is once the cells are no longer able to respirate in the way they were designed to in a healthy, where they're actually using oxygen as a fuel source, okay? And they become anaerobic. They live in this kind of oxygen-free environment. Or you can create that. You can take a healthy cell and deprive it of oxygen and make it an anaerobic condition. And Warburg discovered if you do that long enough, your healthy cells will become a cancer cell. Okay? And so, to me, that's further evidence this is a mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, I think that the DNA issues occur after that process has already started. Okay, that's when the DNA starts to get messed up. And that's why they can't, there's no common DNA trigger that they can point to in cancer, and that's why they haven't been able to find a cure since the whole DNA was discovered. And Nixon declared a war on cancer in the 1970s, and we spent hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars and have hardly moved the needle. There's a few cancers we've actually been able to come up with immunotherapies and other ways that are really effective, but for the most part, heart tumor growth, even the blastomas, there are a lot of things that just, they can't even move the needle. So I think the whole kind of looking for a magic bullet, focusing on DNA as the trigger, is not going to work. It's just not going to work. So we need to step back and say, okay, what can we do to help strengthen the mitochondria? And what can we do to prevent these healthy cells from converting over to this alternate form of energy? Let me also mention as kind of a footnote, which I find fascinating, and this was in Travis's book, and it's been another, and it kind of fits squarely within my purview. That is, before there was oxygen on the planet, every organism that was a living organism necessarily created energy through fermentation, burning of glucose, burning of sugar. That's the way it was done. There was not enough oxygen to support normal respiratory energy production. And so our cells we're all multicellular organisms, but from a single cellular source. Historically, we go back hundreds of billions of years. Our cells are merely reverting back to this kind of prehistoric form of energy production, right? They're saying, look, you're depriving me of oxygen, I can't function, boom, I'm off grid. And now all they do is, what the cells do that are not part of a multicellular organism, two things: eat and divide, eat and divide, eat and divide. That's what cancer does. So, what I'm hoping that this perspective does, I know it's kind of very geeky, but I'm hoping it gets people to understand that cancer is not something outside your body that somehow invaded your body, or that there's something necessarily wrong with you. You have cells within your system that have converted from one form of energy production to another. And
so when we think about mitochondrial health, the things that tend to help our mitochondria are the engines of our cells, are a ketogenic or a higher fat diet, and intermittent fasting, and a really nutrient-dense diet. You were doing all of those things,
yes,
and yet you still end up with this cancer. So what are some of the
well,
other
there were a
ideas
couple things I
about-
wasn't doing that I now do on a consistent basis. I was the guy who spent a lot of time making my magic shake every day, and I literally spent like hours on the weekend prepping for it, and every day it was so nutrient dense. I was this crazy guy who thought if a little bit of something is good for you, a lot of it must be really good for you. And it turns out that was really wrong. I was terribly misinformed, because what I wasn't doing is I wasn't allowing my cells to go through the normal cleansing process, which we call autophagy. I had never fasted before in my life, is what I'm saying. Okay, I had a fire hose, and I was feeding myself nutrients after I was getting as much nutrients into my system as I possibly could on a long-term, consistent basis, thinking, oh, look, I'm going to be the healthiest guy on the planet. But there's this whole process that we go through. And in addition to Otto Warburg, I studied the works of Wilhelm Reich, and I applied some of the tenets of traditional Chinese medicine. There's a lot out there that kind of all fit the same paradigm, and that is life is movement, life is redux, life is ebb and flow, right? Our systems are designed not to just be breathing in all the time. We need to breathe out. It's a process that our cells go through, this whole autophagy process, which is to take on an intercellular and intracellular basis to get the toxins out, right, and to help clean out your system. And so if you don't use fasting as part of your general protocol, your cells really don't have the time to have an opportunity to do that. And so
speak a little bit about autophagy. Is there anyone here who doesn't know what autophagy is? Yeah.
Okay.
I thought.
Yeah, actually it's interesting, because I think the guy who won the Nobel Prize 2 years ago was from Japan, and he did a lot of studies on autophagy and the DNA aspects of autophagy.
Or if you break the word down, it's autophagy.
Right.
Auto meaning self, and phagy meaning to eat.
Right. So the cells are in essence consuming all of the toxins that are in your system and getting them out of your system. Right?
So our unhealthy cells typically die off. The body is always regenerating itself.
Right.
And if those unhealthy cells don't do their job and go through that autophagy process, if they stay alive, those cells might be more likely then to have dysfunction and become malignant.
That's true. Yeah, cancer cells are designed to kill themselves if they're not playing by the rules. Okay?
Autophagy.
And well, that's apoptosis, but they're both interrelated, right? Apoptosis is cellular suicide. Autophagy is cells eating all of the toxins and all of the crap in your system that you want to get out. Just some of it's not even. And when I say toxins, I'm not talking about you've been drinking big gulps. I'm saying that in the actual process of creating energy, there are byproducts that can be toxic to your system, especially if you're only consuming glucose as your form of fuel. It's a kind of a messy form of fuel. It's like a car that has a little smoke coming out of the exhaust pipe. and you want to clean that stuff out. So yeah, ketogenic diet was I think indicated for me, and I'm going to talk a little bit about diet. I'm not going to get too much into it because I think people can go crazy with diet. But I think that fasting was one of the things I had never done. I moved my level of ketones from a traditional nutritional ketosis, which is 0.5 millimolars, to 2.0 millimolars, which is therapeutic ketosis, which is the range you want to be in. Certainly if you have a blastoma, there's a lot of studies that have been done with brain cancer, and they say there's a huge benefit to being in therapeutic ketosis. Whether you're using standard of care or trying to just...
Does everyone know what ketosis is? Anyone not know?
Okay, yeah, ketosis is, the ketogenic diet is the latest craze in the whole dietary space. And again, the reason why I don't like getting too in the weeds on diet, because I think diet's a lot like religion. People they really get bent out of shape if if they're vegan and you happen to be eating meat and vice versa. Diet is important, don't get me wrong. Diet's really important. It's a foundational element. A lot of the other things you do are just not going to be able to take root if your diet is all messed up. But you're not going to cure yourself with diet alone. Now, when I say diet, I'm talking about none of us should be eating unhealthy fat oils, right? Industrial seed oils, canola oil, all of these things that are extremely toxic. Those should just be taken off your diet, period, whether you decide to do one diet or the other. I think grains are problematic. I'm of the view that grains are problematic, not only because the carbohydrate load and the lectin load, but here in the United States, and in Canada as well, the farmers like to run more than one set of crops to their field, so they spray glyphosate, which is Roundup. And they're not trying to kill weeds. They're trying to kill the wheat because they can't run the big combines through it, the wheat's still green. And so what they do is they spray glyphosate on the wheat, and then they can go harvest the wheat and they can plant their next crop. And so you're buying these wheat products that are full of glyphosate. Now glyphosate, they've proven, is perfectly healthy to drink. If you drink a cup of it, it's not going to kill you. It will, however, destroy your gut microbiome, and it'll destroy your gut lining. So ultimately, over a period of time, this cumulative effect will kick in, and you'll have all sorts of serious, serious illnesses. So you want to get that out. If you're suffering with cancer, the last thing you want to do is put a strain on your immune system. You want to figure out what you're doing that's putting a strain on your immune system and move that off the table as quickly as possible. And so having a clean diet is more important than whether you happen to be vegan or ketogenic. But I think in my own perspective, when it comes to healing, you want to try to be in ketosis as best you can. And just to get back to your question, our bodies have two substrates that we can burn as a fuel source. We have carbohydrates, glucose, sugar. It's all the same. If you eat a bagel, it's like eating 16 teaspoons of sugar. Your body doesn't know the difference. And our bodies are designed, if we're healthy and we're in balance, to have about a teaspoon of sugar in our system. We need some glucose to function, but not very much. And so if you're consuming a lot of carbohydrates, you're necessarily overloading your pancreas to produce insulin, you're creating all sorts of problems. And by the way, cancer only can burn glutamine, but its primary substrate is glucose, right? Which is how a PET scan works. PET scan, they take radioisotopes, they mix with glucose, they stick you in a machine, they inject it in your blood, and they look for where that glucose coagulates, and where they see a little ball of glucose in your system, and they say, oh look, you have cancer here, okay? That's how strong glucose, and it needs it because it only produces 2 ATP, whereas a healthy cell produces 36. I know I'm getting on a bit of a tangent here, and we're going to run out of time, so I want to make sure I cover as much as we can. So the alternative fuel source are ketones, and ketones basically are produced by the liver when you consume high amounts of fat. And so your mitochondria love ketones. Your clarity, your mental clarity is off the charts once you get into ketosis. Now, if you've been burning glucose for a long time, you've been kind of a high carb person for a long time, you go through the keto flu before your body can adapt to being able to burn ketones. So I didn't have that because I was doing paleo for a long time. I was very fat adapted. My perspective on diet in a nutshell is you want to have metabolic flexibility. You want to be able to fast, period. And the only way you can intermittent fast or do extended fast without suffering any adverse, I feel like crap, is you got to be able to burn ketones. And once your body's used to burning ketones, it's easy to flip back and forth, as long as you keep your levels of carbohydrates down to something reasonable.
And I just want to say, as a physician, it's really important that if you take medications for blood sugar, blood pressure, other metabolic issues, you want to talk to your care provider before you start engaging in fasting, especially if you're doing full fluid, water-only fasting, which a lot of people are doing now.
I couldn't agree with you more, Max. I do think there's, Walter Longo has a fast mimicking diet called Prolong. For those that have difficulty in fasting, you can use that as a 5-day fast. And 5 days seems to be the magic number for full benefits of autophagy, so that's what he does. He sells a box and you take it home and he gives you the food for 5 days, and it'll be the functional equivalent of fasting.
And I just also want to say that this is all really new research and it's changing constantly. And some of the experts that I've listened to still have the caveat of saying that we don't know still what is the optimal way to fast, or what is the optimal diet. A bagel may be difficult for someone and may not be a problem for someone else, and probably a lot of that depends on what's going on in our gut.
That's right.
But it's fascinating.
Right.
So maybe talk about some of the other things because you did a lot of.
I did a lot, and I definitely don't want to kind of short circuit the discussion on the energetic emotional side. A lot of the therapies that I did were to create a very kind of hypo-oxidative system in my body. I wanted to have as much oxygen in my system as possible because I know it tends to be cytotoxic to cancer, and it just helps the cells that haven't been converted over, because I had metastases, to stay in their normal format as far as respirating and creating energy and not going off grid. So obviously that, when I say oxidative stresses, that they were ozone therapy, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, high-dose vitamin C. People don't think of it because vitamin C is traditionally an antioxidant, but when you're doing 80 grams or 100 grams as an IV, I'm talking 80,000 milligrams or 100,000 milligrams, that's a lot of vitamin C. It interacts with the iron in your blood and turns into hydrogen peroxide, which is very toxic to fungus and all sorts, and viruses and cancer, okay? These are all kind of therapies that fall into the same space. The idea being, get your levels of oxygen up, get your energy levels up. Obviously, we don't have time to talk about it, but I've done a lot of research into kind of, the voltage within the cells and how that plays into the pH balance and the ability of the cells to utilize oxygen. There's a guy named Jerry Tennant who wrote a book that's, I think, a game changer in this space called Healing is Voltage. I don't recommend it because it's like a textbook written for doctors, but it's really got a lot of interesting things in it. So those are kind of the therapies. I did that. I did some supplementation. I think that it's interesting because going back to my roots, the first thing I did, obviously, was a fast, and it was fortuitous I ended up doing a fast because I didn't know at the time I had cancer. I just knew I had problems with my prostate. And I read a book about prostate health, and one of the things the author recommended, which I know, is that you do a master cleanse. And so I went out and bought a ton of lemons and a bunch of maple syrup and a bunch of cayenne pepper. And for those of you who don't know, it's kind of this you create this concoction with maple syrup, lemons, and cayenne pepper, and you just drink that with your fasting, what you're consuming during the fast. And because I had been in ketosis for so long, my body went into sugar shock the very first day, and I said, ooh, this is not going to work. And so I just did a water fast. So it's kind of fortuitous that I ended up doing a water fast. And I also went to see my friend Stephen Rogers and spent 5 days with him to kind of work on the emotional and energetic side. So it's interesting because I hear these stories, and they all have the same theme. And that is, a lot of our wellness relates specifically to kind of our feelings about ourselves and the relationship that we have to the people in our lives and our environment. Do you get up in the morning, you're excited to get out of bed? How much energy do you have? Are you moving? Are you grounding yourself? Moving and grounding are two ways to get your cell voltage where you want it to be. And just real quickly, because we have 5 minutes, your babies are running about negative 50 millivolts, which means their cells have 50 units of electron donor capacity. The average adult who's healthy is minus 25 millivolts, which is healthy, but it's obviously you're not a baby. By the way, if you have an injury, you need to be at negative 50 millivolts to produce new cells, to repair that injury, and to create new cells in your body, okay? Cancer is plus 30 millivolts, which means you're now stealing 30 electrons from elsewhere in order to keep those cells alive. And so all of these things, if you stand back and you do an overlay, you kind of look at this landscape at once, they all start to make sense. And they all start to fit together, okay? This whole idea of pH, I mean, pH is obviously very important, but why? Why is pH important? Well, pH is important because it relates to how much oxygen you can meet in your cells, which relates to the millimoles of your cells. So grounding is really important. People talk about grounding. Why is grounding important? Why do I need to go sit on the ground and hug a tree, or touch your friend who you know is healthy? Because that, you equalize each other's electrical discharge. These are all things that are really important. We don't know why they're important, but when you step back and you look at the science, it's like, bingo, I see why that makes perfect sense. This is really important. And I hadn't focused on some of these things before I got ill. So I would say the biggest challenge remains, and it's the biggest challenge I think we all face, is to how best to address kind of the energetic emotional side of this. How do you stop listening to the screaming bitch up in the attic, whatever she called it? I have one too, right? We all do, right? And how do you listen to that my little boy, in my case, who's been abandoned as a child, whatever it is? These are all things that you need to kind of work through in order to have lasting healing. All of the other things that I talk about will help you get your legs under you so you can get back into a healing state. Let me see if I can close on this. I like to refer to cancer as a verb, right? We're either cancering, which means our body is not addressing the cells in our body that are cancerous, or we're healing, which means our bodies are. Everyone in this room has cancer, and we need to know that. Everyone has cancer. The question is your immune system addressing the cells when they go off grid, or is it not? And if it's not for a long period of time, then you have the symptom of the disease, which shows up on a scan. We call that cancer. And so when you see your doctor, they're addressing the symptom of the disease. And a lot of the things that I kind of have stumbled upon, or that have been brought to my attention by others, are things that I think will benefit you, whether you decide to go down the path of standard of care, or whether you decide that, look, I have some time, my condition's not that acute, I can use some alternative treatments and just see what happens. Can I get back to can I get my healing state back, right? Because I think modern medicine is the best medicine in the world for acute conditions. If you get in a car accident, have a bad infection, broken bones, or a tumor is about to cut off the blood supply to your brain, you don't mess around with that. But cancer, as we know it, is just a symptom of a chronic condition that's been around for a long time. Modern medicine really doesn't get to the underlying cause, which is why even when you have someone who's had so-called complete cure, and again, I don't like to use that word because we all have cancer all the time, it'll pop up again later on because they haven't addressed whatever it was that was the underlying cause during that period of time. And so my goal is to, as a non-doctor, but as someone who's been down this path and continues to struggle, is to help people have their bearings so that they can see, look, I have options. This is not a death sentence. These are healthy cells that have gone off grid. Let's see if we can fix this.
So you have a really nice graphic on your website, which is questtocurecancer.com. Maybe speak to that and what's next for you, or how can people get in touch with you? Maybe
Sure.
say a little bit more about the future.
If you go to my website, there's a place you can send your email address. I'd be happy to, and I respond to emails now. If the list gets too long, I probably won't be able to do that. But the grid that's on there was my attempt at organizing all of the various kind of treatment protocols or lifestyle interventions. I'd say the lifestyle intervention components of that grid are things that everyone should do regardless of whether they've been diagnosed with a cancer condition or not. Those are things you want to do to avoid getting cancer if you can. Then there's a separate grid for therapeutic intervention, which is for people that actually have cancer. And these are things you want to do to kind of help have better outcomes, whether you're going to use radiation, chemotherapy, other treatments, or whether you're not. And I have a book that's coming out early next year, which the title is still up in the air. I'm working with a publisher on it, but I'm trying to get everything in place where people can actually look at it and see and hopefully have a really good sense of exactly what it is that they want to, and to pair with some of the other speakers too, taking control of your own health. Boy, I could do a whole presentation on that alone, because even the best doctor in the world is going to give you a very right here, or it's going to give you a very small sliver of attention. And so you want to be able to walk into Max's office and say, okay, these are the things that I know. Can you please help me figure that out? These are things that fit into my life. So these are things I know I need to work on. These are things I can do based on geography or all these other things.
So these are the common themes that we've heard today, and it really seems like from what you and I were talking about last night and from today, It's sometimes just aligning again with our authenticity, our purpose, the things that are really important to us. Sometimes that's a shift that really helps to change everything, including our metabolism and our risk for illness. So
yeah, let me see if I can close on this note, because I think you just, Maxine, hit the nail on the head. This is going to be really hard for some of you to hear me say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. My life is better now than it was before I got diagnosed with cancer. And you say, how could that be? Because before I got diagnosed with cancer, I had this crazy idea that I was going to live forever. And things that were priorities to me could always be shifted. I could push them down the road a little bit, whether it was something I wanted to be doing that I wasn't doing, or whether it was something that I was doing I didn't want to be doing. It didn't matter. Once I confronted my mortality, now my priorities line up like bowling pins, and I just can't tolerate doing things that don't kind of fit into those priorities. And so, the dynamic of my experience and how I kind of relate to others is so much better, because I don't have that baggage of constantly feeling like I'm doing this, but I should be doing that, or whatever it is. So it's not all bad. There's some real positive things that can come out of this. And I wish I could bottle that up and sell it, because I think it would be very valuable for everyone to have that experience.